Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard is the sequel to The Hitman's Bodyguard that came out in 2017. I remember it doing pretty okay, pretty decent at the box office for an original kind of action comedy. So the fact that those numbers were apparently good enough for a sequel, I guess that means a lot for Lionsgate and Millennium Media. So we jump into this movie, and Michael Bryce, played by Ryan Reynolds once again, is in therapy. He can't get over certain things from his past involving his job, the protection of Kurosawa, who it was revealed was shot by Darius Kincaid, played by Samuel L. Jackson, who Ryan Reynolds was forced to protect throughout a lot of that movie. And his therapist suggests going on sabbatical, taking a break from the job and just finding yourself and going on a spiritual journey, and that's what he starts to do, until Salma Hayek shows up as Sonia Kincaid, saying that Darius needs his help. So these two, and now with the addition of Sonia, go on a new wacky comedic action adventure that may involve the fate of the world. Yippee! I was actually kind of excited to see this movie. I watched the trailer and I was like, this looks pretty funny. I'm actually kind of jazzed up to see it because I remember seeing the first Hitman's Bodyguard movie and thinking it was a decent time. I rewatched it before seeing this new one last night, and I still had the same amount of fun as I did the first time around. I think it's just a really fun comedy with some good action scenes and a great chaotic dynamic duo with Ryan Reynolds and Samuel L. Jackson. There's issues in that movie for sure. It's not perfect, but what makes it entertaining is mostly those two's interactions and how they deal with action sequences and, just the action sequences themselves. I think Patrick Hughes even handled that movie pretty well, especially considering The Expendables 3. That movie was a big step up from Expendables 3. So going into this movie, you have Patrick Hughes back, you got Tom O'Connor, who wrote the script, back, and you have, pretty much the same cast. This is probably going to be, about the same kind of quality. It seems pretty promising from the trailers. The only thing that might be worrying is that there's two new writers aboard, both with the last name Murphy. This is, their first project. So who knows what that may mean, but I know that Tom O'Connor is there and everything else seems to be lining up into place, so I'm still excited to see this. And walking out of this movie, I was actually more conflicted on it than I thought I would be. Let me explain why. First off, Ryan Reynolds, I think he's great. I love the guy. As far as an action star goes, I think he's perfect for it because you're convinced that this guy can pull off the physicality that he has to in this movie, that he can truly be a badass. But Ryan Reynolds, I think, really has it as far as comedic chops. I think he's a really funny guy, and he's got some really great jokes in here as a little bit more of the straight man, similar to how he was in the duo of him and Sam Jackson in the first movie. The kind of play it safe, by the book kind of bodyguard. This time around now he's trying to find ways to not be as involved with the action scenes, not use guns as much, and not be involved with so much carnage. I thought that created a really good comedic setup for the character. I think Ryan Reynolds really plays it well, and he still rocks the chemistry with him and Samuel L. Jackson. I think these two still work really well together, and Samuel L. Jackson, there's just a way that he delivers his lines in this movie that make it extra funny. I feel like if this was any other actor, it could have potentially not been as good. It's really not as simple a role as you might think, mostly just because of Samuel L. Jackson's charisma. He has that kind of je ne sais quoi as far as what makes him a good comedic actor as well. There's just, I can't even describe it, the way he delivers lines, man. He's too good, and these two bounce off of each other really well once again. It was great seeing him back as this abrasive, no-nonsense hitman who literally does not give a single fuck. He and Salma Hayek have really great chemistry too. You buy their relationship, you buy them as a couple, and it is really great to see Salma Hayek take up much more of a leading role this time around. In the first movie, kind of a supporting kind of comedic appearance here and there, yeah, that's totally fine, but in this movie they really give her a lot to do, much more of a time to shine, and she's excellent. She's maybe even more foul-mouthed than Samuel L. Jackson, or about the same, I would say. They're just so perfect as these characters. She adds a new kind of chaotic layer to this already kind of chaotic chemistry that Ryan and Samuel L. Jackson have. Once again, I think Patrick Hughes does a good job with a lot of the action sequences. I think as far as negatives go, there are certain technical problems that I had with the first movie, some visual effects shots, some editing stuff that kind of carry over into this one. I was kind of hoping maybe would be improved, but still, for the most part, I was enjoying a lot of the action that was presented, and also the comedy works really well. I was laughing a lot in this movie. There's this much more crowded than I was expecting theater that I was in. Also, we're having a great time with it. There's not really a post-credit scene or a mid-credit scene. It's two names into the credits and then they show this little clip, and that was hysterical too. So, and it got a big reaction out of the crowd. A lot of people really enjoyed this movie. But this is where my conflict with the movie kind of creeps in, is that this movie is actually a lot more of a parody this time around. Than I was expecting. Like, the first movie, it has some satirical elements as far as, like, yeah, you've seen this kind of movie before. Here's, like, a funny scene where something that's usually, like, maybe dramatic or heartfelt is played up for laughs. But I think in the context of the movie, it actually kind of works, you know? Like, it's mostly, what I'm referring to is mostly, like, how these characters met up with, like, their significant others when they're retelling those stories. And it's, like, supposed to be, like, this heartfelt kind of reflection on them as people. But it's just, like, it's really funny what they're describing. So there are moments in the first movie that you could say are satirical of the genre that it's in, but that movie to me is not like a complete farce, you know? This movie is, it really does lean into more of like a parody this time around than I was actually expecting. So there's already like a weird contrast. Like if you watch the first movie, like, oh, it had some moments where like you get to know the characters in a little bit more of like a heartfelt way, while also having like these really funny jokes. This movie has seeds that could have been planted to make like a more like in-depth kind of sequel, as far as you get to know the characters a bit more, like you actually get to grow to like them even more. You get to see them change maybe in a way that's like organic and actually very interesting. But instead of planting that and just letting it kind of grow naturally, this movie kind of plays a lot of the typical kind of sequel points as jokes. And hey, they're pretty funny. There's one part in particular that, you know, what's supposed to be a sad story is actually fucking hysterical, and everyone was laughing. It was a great time. It was a great time for all. So really, going into this movie, you just kind of have to know, like, if you're somebody who just wants to see comedy, you don't really want to be particularly moved by a character, or you don't want to be like particularly intrigued by certain plot developments that are happening, you just want to laugh and have a good time, then yeah, this is the movie for you. For me, I'm looking at it as, well, I enjoy the first movie because of the way that the plot is overall handled. I like the way they handle the jokes, but I like the way you get attached to these characters. So watching this movie, and it's like the complete reversal of them doubling down on the satirical moments of the first one, that was kind of off-putting, despite it being, once again, fun. Like, they're fun jokes, but I think in a movie that is in other places pretty forgettable, I think jokes could have worked better in those areas, and you could have also made it more memorable by focusing more on our heroes and giving them a bit more of a dramatic heft to them. There are certain comedies, like the first Hitman's Bodyguard, that have more dramatic elements that are surrounded by jokes, but ultimately kind of work because you're attached to the characters, you like knowing more about them. It all depends on execution. And this one, I think, just overall execution-wise didn't really work for me. There's a couple jokes that I think didn't really land, as far as, like, they're not really groaners, it's just kind of like a flat line, no reaction, like, oh, I see that was supposed to be a joke. Wasn't really all that funny, though. I was surprised that Michael Bryce didn't really feel like Michael Bryce. He feels more like Ryan Reynolds this time around. And yes, the Darius Kincaid and Michael Bryce are pretty much just Samuel L. Jackson and Ryan Reynolds. It's just that, you know, one is a no-nonsense hitman and the other is a play-it-safe bodyguard, you know, but it's essentially those personalities. But there's still, like, it's rooted in character. Those personalities are rooted in these new characters. This movie, Michael Bryce doesn't really share a lot of similarities with how he was in the first movie. It mostly feels like Ryan Reynolds running around, interacting with people, which, hey, he's a fun guy to watch, but as far as, like, consistency with the character goes, it was a little lazy this time around, I gotta be honest with you. The movie even has, like, this rushed kind of quality to it. Like, the movie opens, and I was wondering, like, are they going to explain away Elodie Young with, like, a line of dialogue, or is she gonna have, like, a surprise appearance in this? Because the first movie kind of ends in a place where she and Ryan Reynolds could potentially be, like, all good, you know, their relationship maybe patched up, or at least maybe explored a bit more, and they don't really. So it just kind of opens with Michael Bryce explaining this, like, nightmare that's been haunting him to a therapist, and then she's like, go on sabbatical, and he's like, okay, and he goes on sabbatical, and he's like, this is much better. But you don't really see how exactly his life is being, like, haunted or kind of, like, ruined in a sense. In this movie. Even in the first movie, like, it ends in a place where you're like, okay, things could be going pretty well for Michael Bryce. And this movie just is like, no, nothing's going right. I'm just so depressed. But you don't, it's just him telling you that, you know? It doesn't really show you or get you particularly invested. It feels like one of those sequels that resets after the first movie, you know what I mean? Like, even though characters have made arcs and they have maybe grown and changed throughout the course of one movie, well, there has to be another one, and these characters are expected to be kind of the same as they were in the first one, maybe even doubled down in some places, so reset. You know, the art doesn't matter. And continuing on with that a bit further, like, this movie's initial setup felt a lot more sequel bait than I was expecting too. It almost feels like these characters just kind of meet up just by happenstance. Like they reunite and get involved with the rest of the plot because of like completely unrelated things, which in a better movie you wouldn't really recognize as much because they would have something that, you know, you're attached to the characters right now. Like you're on for the ride with them because you're interested in their character development and their personal stories. In this movie, it just feels like, yeah, while this character's doing this character's coming and they're gonna go do this now, which then leads them to this, and then they get involved because of this. And it's like, it feels a little bit more choppy and just kind of noticeable that they needed to make another one. So, you know, reset the character arcs, they're back to basics. And they meet up because of some circumstantial things that it might not have even happened if certain characters didn't do some other things. And you barely even see him on vacation too. It's like him in that slow-mo scene in the trailer reading The Secret, and then all of a sudden just bullets start flying, Salma Hayek's there, and they're off on their adventure. There's plenty of moments too where throughout the course of the movie, action scenes feel like they're just starting to start, and then they're kind of over with pretty quickly. And hey, like they're mostly handled pretty well by Patrick Hughes, but I was surprised at how quick this movie was going. I'm not saying every movie needs to be the same length. I'm not saying that just because the first movie was an hour 50 minutes and this one is like more hour 30, 35, that's a bad thing. It's not really. It all depends on the story you're telling and how you're telling it. But with this movie, it just felt like they were just skipping through, like, okay, we just got to get through this action scene. Let's do this other one, and now let's get through it. That kind of style of filmmaking approach to these sequences kind of became noticeable to me. There's moments where action scenes would start and I wouldn't really understand why they started. Like when Salma Hayek does grab Ryan Reynolds, who are these guys that are shooting at her and him? Like, who are these guys? Honestly, I don't even really know if they're really involved with their next action scene or not, because there's no real reference to it. The villains aren't afraid, like, oh, they escaped the other guys and they're coming for us. Like, there's just no mention of it ever again. Those characters could be completely unrelated. Frank Grillo is someone in this movie who I like him as an actor. I think he's done some good work before, but in this movie, I think his character is a bit of a miscalculation just as far as how to handle him. He's like a Boston cop, but he works with like Interpol, which is like pretty, like that's a pretty funny idea in and of itself. And seeing how the rest of the movie played out, there's moments where you can play that character up as far as like how he acts. But I just found a lot of his utilization in this movie pretty weak. He doesn't really have any funny lines in this movie. Like a lot of the times when he's talking to our heroes, it's a lot of shut the fuck up, just shut the fuck up. And it's like, that's not really funny. It's not really clever. It's just you being annoyed at all of the characters talking at once, which, hey, that is pretty annoying, but after a while, it's like, we gotta have something for you, dude, because this is, it's too good a comedic idea, this character, to just kind of have not be utilized well. At one point, they even have him say a corny-ass line near the end of the film that I was not expecting them to actually say. It's like one of those things where like a character is like looking down at the camera, and it's zooming in, and they're like, I can't believe it, but the fate of the world is in the hands of a hitman and a bodyguard. Like that exact line. And it's like, really? That is corny as hell. I also didn't feel anything for any of the antagonists of this movie. In the last one, I'm not necessarily against the character Gary Oldman was playing. I just think every single scene with him was a miscalculation in the sense that, you know, they're executing it wrong, like maybe slow this scene down so his villainy can kind of, his disgustingness can kind of seep in and you can really take it in and give Gary Oldman a chance to really act. And in that movie, his acting isn't necessarily bad, it's just, yeah, the writing for it isn't all that good. A better villain for sure than Antonio Banderas in this movie. And I love Antonio Banderas. He's a treasure. He's an icon. Mwah, love you, dude. But him in this movie, he only has like one joke. There's like only one joke for this guy, and it's like a callback to a joke Ryan Reynolds already made in a separate scene. So this character is just kind of there, and he's the one taking this kind of seriously. He has a connection to one of the heroes too, so I won't spoil what that is, but they try to play this character seriously. It really does feel like Antonio Banderas is in a more serious movie, but he's surrounded by all these exaggerated forms of comedy. It's weird that they doubled down on the comedy in so many other sequences, but Antonio Banderas plays it pretty straight. He's kind of a forgettable villain because of it. You know, I honestly don't really remember what his role in the world is itself. Like, is he a leader of a country, or was he just like a terrorist leader or something like that? Is he just a leader of like a military group or something? Honestly, I legit don't remember. There's other like smaller antagonists, like, you know, the tough guys, the heavies that are going to be challenging our heroes too, that are introduced, and they even have interesting ideas as far as like a narrative goes, but this isn't really a movie focused on a narrative, as I've already described earlier. This movie's not interested in having the characters face these guys and learning from them, learning about themselves through them, and learning to overcome certain things because of it, learning from their weaknesses by seeing it in these people or anything like that. It's just, oh hey, this guy is this to me. Or Samuel L. Jackson would go, oh shit, that guy is this. And he's pretty dangerous. I know him because he's also a hitman. And they don't really do anything else with that, like with the characters or even like as far as jokes go. One of them does have like some like string of jokes that are like, he's responding to certain things that Ryan Reynolds is saying in completely separate scenes that completely contradicts what he's saying, so it's funny because of that. It's like, okay, like, it's not that's not bad as far as comedy goes, but then there's nothing else throughout. I don't really feel intimidated by any of these characters. I barely know any of them. I don't really feel it, and the performances, as much as they're not doing awful, it's just, there's nothing to get attached to. There's one character, too. I won't spoil who it is because I don't think they've barely been marketing this guy being in it, but this character shows up in a role that I found hysterical. Ryan Reynolds plays it really well when they reveal what it is. It's really good. Samuel L. Jackson, like, just, those two play it off well when they reveal this certain character, and I thought, that's fun. That's a fun addition to this, but then they play it up as a twist, like, oh, well, actually, da-da. And it's like, oh, all right, I didn't know we were doing that, but it's kind of funny, and then they just, it's funny to see this particular actor show up and be in some truly goofy shit. But it kind of perfectly exemplifies how this movie had a lot of opportunities to go in different directions, tell an actual story, and as much as it's not bad to tell a movie that's ultimately just a comedy, ultimately just a farce, these things are there and could be explored and could have made for a much more interesting movie, because as it stands right now, this movie has a lot of problems with its villains, its characterizations, its rushed nature as far as getting involved with the plot. I was barely kind of involved because the movie kept going and going and going and barely having a moment to slow down and kind of show what this means to the characters. The first movie has those moments, I think, pretty well balanced. But overall, I did enjoy a lot of this movie. There is a lot of fun to be had here, but I think it also has a new share of issues that the first movie had and then also didn't have. So it's them trying to double down on the best parts of the first movie, but also doubling down in some of the worst parts at the same time. So I was ultimately disappointed by this movie, but also there's some pretty funny jokes in this. I'm not gonna lie. There is moments of entertainment in this movie. So that's why I'm so conflicted on it, because I want to say like, hey, I had fun with it. It's just kind of a joke, but you know, it's a fun time. These characters play it well, but I'm also thinking, well, as a movie though, it feels almost kind of lazy that they didn't take certain opportunities because they're going in a completely different tonal direction than the first movie did. So ultimately it just comes down to this. I'm gonna give The Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard a C. I think they definitely could have gone in other directions. But if you're not really looking for that, if you're not really looking for a more serious movie or a more comedic movie with some serious elements, you just want complete comedy, complete entertainment, this could be it for you. But if you're someone like me, then you might not. It really just depends on what your preference is here. But if you've seen The Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard, leave in the comments below what you thought of it. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.